Hey, I'm Warren Sprouse. This is the Bible Forum. It is the last Sunday in January, and we're here for you on the Bible Forum, looking at life through a biblical lens. I said the last January of 2017. I do that because there are hundreds of YouTubes out there on our website, and sometimes you want to come back and say, well, I remember it was this or it was that. This is January 29th. There are two or three quotes, statements that I've run across in this last week, looking at the kinds of things that are going on in the world. This is our What in the World segment. We are hearing people talk about so many others who are voting in more than one place. You remember the election scam kind of a thing, and both sides are going back and forth. Well, I heard this past week, and I actually saw it on the news. Somebody had done the work and found that Donald Trump's daughter from the previous marriage had a driver's license from the state of New York where she voted. But since she went to school in Pennsylvania, she had a driver's license in Pennsylvania, and she was registered to vote there. So voila, we have the president's daughter who is registered to vote in two different places. Aha, see? Why do you suppose that's the way it is? Well, in the 1990s, our president, Bill Clinton, in a Democrat Congress, pushed through a bill called the Motor Voter Law. And you probably are registered to vote in several different states. Because if you register your car and you get your driver's license, when you get your driver's license, you're automatically registered to vote. Doesn't mean you voted in that state, but hey, you probably could. I got a question, and this question revolves around our whole immigrant issue that plagues us here in the last few years. I'm just wondering if any of those people who are advocating for embracing illegal immigrants, regardless of whether we know who they are, what they're about, where they come from, what their intentions are, regardless of whether we keep track of them in our computer systems or anything close to that. Now, we have an immigration policy in this country, and we do keep track of people. They come in, we kind of know who they are before they get here, and we know where they settled up and settled in, and we can go back through. They commit a crime, we know who they are, blah, blah, blah. Some of these illegal immigrants coming in from the Middle East, as well as coming up from Mexico, are just coming in, and we don't really know a whole lot about them. And the conservatives, the Republicans, and others are trying to say we need to have a registration. And of course, the liberals, the progressives are saying, no, we don't need a registration. That's immoral. And then you just. So it occurred to me this week, wondering if any of these liberal progressives that just want to open the doors and let all these people walk into our country, whether we know anything about them or not, I'm wondering if they have a lock on their door at home. What do you think? And do they lock it at night? And when they're not there, do they lock it? Or are they consistent? And they just have an open door policy, and you can walk in, walk out. We trust you completely. I'm sure you wouldn't take anything. You wouldn't damage anything. You wouldn't hurt anybody. I can rest easy while I'm working or I'm sleeping. Everything's fine. But suddenly, when we want a lock on our front door of the nation, we're six kinds of bad person. Just a note of interest, our first black president, President Barack Obama, had an approval rating of 75.3% when he entered office 8 years ago. He had a 57% his last year in office. After his first year, he received sustained majority approval only one more time during his first term in office, according to the Gallup people. Shortly after his second term began, his support dipped back into the 40s and did not return to the majority level again until his final year in office. They conclude that the public liked Obama when he first took office, and they liked him when he was on his way out, but consistently disapproved of him during the majority of his time in office. A new Rasmussen report survey released Thursday of last week, January 25, 2017, says President Trump has a 59% job approval rating among likely voters. And somehow, according to the liberals, that shows that nobody likes him. Saturday was Holocaust Remembrance Day. Did you remember the Holocaust? In Warsaw, Poland, Jewish and Christian leaders prayed over the ruins of the gas chambers there at Auschwitz and Birkenau, as some leaders warned Friday evening of an international Holocaust Remembrance Day of rising xenophobic hatred against Jews and others, including Muslims. Dozens of survivors gathered with political leaders and representatives of Poland's Jewish community at the site where Germany murdered about 1.1 million people during World War II, mostly Jews from across Europe, but also Poles, Romanians, and other Soviet prisoners of war. Poland's prime minister, who is from the Polish town where Auschwitz Memorial Museum is located, recalled the destruction of humanity, as he put it, and the ocean of lost lives and hopes. He said it's an open wound that may close sometimes, but it shall never be fully healed, and it must not be forgotten. Many were disappointed that our president acknowledged the day without ever mentioning the Jews. His statement refers to those killed by the Holocaust as victims, survivors, heroes, innocent people. Referenced those who died, the innocent, the perished, the powers of good. But they're never identified as Jewish, and anti-Semitic bigotry is never identified as a factor in their deaths. Now, maybe he's new to the subtleties, or it may be he's seeking to broaden the sentiment to cover all who were persecuted. We probably will learn more about it this week. So stay tuned. Keep your ears open. Look around. See what he says. Let me know. You remember back in July there was a coup in Turkey. Never quite sure if it was a staged, orchestrated kind of thing or whether it was a real coup. But to this day, Turkey is still under martial law. Recently, there was a vote of parliament that gave the president of Turkey even more power. They gave preliminary assent to sweeping constitutional amendments that would abolish the office of prime minister and see Turkey's president gain executive powers. Can you say dictator? The vote will be put to a nationwide referendum in the spring. The amendments were passed 339 to 149. The vote required a 3/5 majority, 330, before the legislation could be put to a referendum. If the legislation, however, had garnered a 2/3, 367, it would have become law straight away. The Prime Minister said the changes would create a, quote, sole power that would be strong, end of quote. In total, the Parliament approved 18 separate amendments to the Constitution, which now will be ratified in a referendum slated to take place in April. The official website of the presidency of Turkey lists President Erdogan his new powers. He has the sole power to appoint and to fire ministers. He has the power to retain ties with a political party, or I suppose to not. He has the power to determine whether or not to impose a state of emergency. The power to issue decrees, we call them executive orders. Other changes include the increased number of lawmakers from 550 to 600, and the introduction of substitute lawmakers. The amendments will greatly increase the power of Turkey's Islamist president, who was previously Turkey's prime minister. You might have noticed that our president, President Donald Trump, has been a busy little beaver this week. Somebody had counted upwards of 11 executive orders that were put out, sometimes twice a day, for the first week that he was in office. But on Friday, he signed an executive order at the Pentagon to begin what he called a great rebuilding of the U.S. Armed Services, promising new aircraft, naval ships, and more resources for the military. You do realize that our military is smaller now than it was just leading up to World War II. Our military strength will be questioned by no one, he said, but neither will our dedication to peace. We do want peace. Trump predicted that Congress, which sets the expenditures for the government, will be, quote, very happy to see the White House's new spending request for the military. He wants a naval fleet of 350 vessels, up from the Navy's current 274, and more than its 310 vessel target. He has excluded the military from a hiring freeze across the rest of the government that he ordered just after being inaugurated president on January 20. He is also expected to order his new defense secretary, James Mattis, that's Mad Dog Mattis, to intensify operations against the Islamic State group in Iraq and Syria with more U.S. soldiers and military hardware like artillery and attack helicopters. Another expected move is to review and strengthen the country's ability to defend itself against cyber attacks and to conduct offensive cyber attacks itself. A new video this week from this organization called Live Action Investigative sheds light on the fact that Planned Parenthood, which has always advertised that they offer prenatal services, find out that they don't do it. In the new video, Planned Parenthood's employees responded to undercover investigators who were asking questions about the advertisements relative to prenatal care. And they're claiming to have audio from more than 90 Planned Parenthood facilities around the country. Some of the comments include, no, we don't do prenatal services. I mean, it's called Planned Parenthood. I know it's kind of deceiving. Planned Parenthood offers abortion, so they don't offer prenatal care, one employee of a Tempe, Arizona Planned Parenthood facility said. No, we don't do prenatal services. I mean, it's called Planned Parenthood. I know that's kind of deceiving. That was a familiar refrain. It came up several times. Interesting, huh? In a Time magazine op-ed, former Soviet Union President Mikhail Gorbachev recently wrote, "It all looks as if the world is preparing for war. The nuclear threat once again seems real. Relations between the great powers have been going from bad to worse for several years now. The advocates for arms buildup and the military-industrial complex are rubbing their hands. We must break out of this situation. We need to resume political dialogue aiming at joint decisions and joint action." Another man spoke on this subject a number of years ago, a general of the Army here in the United States of America, addressing the Michigan legislature in Lansing. He says, talk of imminent threat to our national security through external force is pure nonsense. Our threat is from the insidious forces working from within, which have already so drastically altered the character of our free institutions, those institutions we proudly called the American way of life. His name was Douglas A. MacArthur, and he said that in 1952. On a monument to MacArthur, the quote is, "Battles are not won by arms alone. There must exist above all else a spiritual impulse, a will to victory. In war, There can be no substitute for victory. 60, 70 years, nothing's changed. According to reports, President Trump signed an executive order on Friday ending an unconstitutional executive amnesty policy, one that was instituted by President Obama in 2014, relative to executive action. In Tehran, Iran, foreign airlines are barring Iranians from traveling to the United States following President Donald Trump's temporary order barring visas for 7 Muslim countries, travel agents in Tehran said. Yesterday, 2 Iranians were denied entry at a New York airport. 2 agencies told the Agency of Free Press, that's a French organ, they had been instructed by the Airways from Emirates and Turkish Airlines not to sell U.S. tickets or allow Iranians holding American visas to board U.S.-bound flights. The news comes after Trump imposed tough new controls on travelers from 7 states: Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Trump signed a sweeping executive order on Friday to suspend refugee arrivals and impose tough controls on travelers from those countries. France, Germany, and the United Nations are not happy. At issue specifically is Obama's amnesty program that gave illegal immigrants who have been in the United States for at least 5 years and who are parents of U.S. citizens or legal residents a 3-year work permit. It allowed them to obtain a Social Security number and get a driver's license, which means they can vote. At the time, Pew Research estimated that 3.5 million current illegal immigrants will qualify for this program. You might have seen some of the newsreels over the weekend. Great big guy, Iraqi, I believe, or Syrian, I can't remember which, who was detained for a while until they could figure out who he was, asked him what he thought of the United States. They really thought he was going to say, "This is a terrible place. Look what they're doing to me." And he says, "It's the greatest country on the face of the planet." Who was that man? Apparently he was a native guide, spotter, whatever, for one of our premier snipers. President Trump wants to give Christian refugees in the Middle East priority and end Obama's carte blanche immigration policy, which has been nothing more than a nod toward Muslims and a way to change our election results. I told you last week how all this works. We've seen the rise in demonstrations in airports all over the country. What are they complaining about? Well, they're largely Democrats, liberals, progressives. They're really complaining about the fact that they aren't going to be able to fuel their electoral count. That's what that's all about. You say, no, but they care about the refugees. Then why are we not caring about all refugees? Why only certain ones? And why do they just get to walk in the front door? I mentioned at the top of the show, these liberals, the progressives, I'm convinced they've got locks on their front door at home. But they sure don't want us to have a lock on our door. And the crime statistics, if we knew the truth, we don't even know the truth, and they're shocking. But sheriffs all up and down the border and around the country are praising Trump's move. It is an insanity on every level. But the progressives are using the laws and the courts and the power of the bully pulpit to influence opinion. I don't think it's going to work as well this year and the years to come as it did when we had liberal progressive leadership in Washington. But we'll see.